Have you ever wondered why some individuals seem destined for extraordinary wealth, while others struggle their entire lives? Welcome to a journey that will transform not just your financial reality, but the very lens through which you perceive abundance in this world. What you're about to discover isn't merely information. It's a revelation that has silently guided generations of the world's most prosperous minds. The ancient wisdom contained within a particular psalm has been the hidden foundation upon which countless fortunes have been built, yet remarkably few recognize its profound power. This isn't coincidence or superstition. This is the application of universal principles that Napoleon Hill and other great prosperity thinkers have championed throughout history. The connection between spiritual wisdom and material abundance has been whispered among elite circles for centuries. Those who harness this connection don't merely accumulate wealth, they magnetize it through an extraordinary alignment of mind, spirit, and action. Napoleon Hill discovered during his decades researching the world's most successful individuals that behind their diverse strategies and personalities lay a common thread. They all, whether consciously or unconsciously, applied the principles contained within this transformative psalm. Today, we pull back the curtain on this enigmatic teaching that has remained hidden in plain sight, challenging everything you thought you knew about the creation of wealth. What if I told you that the most profound secret to unlocking abundance has been available to humanity for thousands of years, recorded in ancient text, yet its true message has been obscured by misinterpretation and fragmented understanding? The psalm we're discussing today isn't merely religious verse. It's a psychological blueprint, a metaphysical framework that, when properly understood and applied, fundamentally alters your relationship with prosperity. Before Napoleon Hill articulated his 17 principles of success, before modern manifestation techniques became mainstream, this psalm had already encoded the precise mental patterns required for wealth attraction. Imagine having access to the exact mindset that has created more millionaires than any business school or investment strategy. This isn't about positive thinking alone. It's about activating specific mental frequencies that harmonize with universal laws of abundance. The evidence is astonishing. When individuals integrate these precise principles into their daily thought processes, wealth begins flowing through channels that previously appeared closed or non-existent. Napoleon Hill dedicated his life to decoding these patterns, and what he discovered mirrors precisely what this ancient psalm has been teaching humanity for millennia. If only we had eyes to truly see and ears to genuinely hear its message. Today marks the beginning of your transformation, a pivotal moment where theoretical knowledge becomes practical power in your life. By the end of our time together, you'll possess more than information. You'll wield understanding that fundamentally changes how abundance responds to your very presence. The principles we're about to explore transcend religious boundaries, cultural limitations, and economic circumstances. Whether you're starting with nothing or looking to multiply existing prosperity, the wisdom contained in this psalm, the same wisdom that Napoleon Hill extracted from the minds of history's greatest wealth creators, will illuminate your path forward with unprecedented clarity. The question isn't whether these principles work. The question is whether you're finally ready to apply them with the discipline and conviction they require. Throughout human history, certain texts have carried within them codes of prosperity so profound that they've shaped the destiny of civilizations. Among these, the psalm we're examining today stands as perhaps the most misunderstood yet potently effective blueprint for wealth creation ever recorded. When Napoleon Hill interviewed Andrew Carnegie and subsequently spent 20 years studying 500 of America's most successful individuals, he discovered that their methods, though varied in application, all connected to fundamental laws of abundance that have existed since time immemorial. What makes this particular psalm so extraordinary is how it encapsulates these exact principles in language that speaks directly to both the conscious and subconscious mind. creating an internal environment where wealth becomes not just possible but inevitable. The psalm functions as what Napoleon Hill would later term a mental dynamo, a thought structure so perfectly aligned with universal laws that it generates tremendous creative power. Consider for a moment how electricity existed for all of human history before we learned to harness it effectively. Similarly, the principles of wealth generation have always existed, yet most people live their entire lives without properly channeling these forces. This psalm doesn't merely suggest positive thinking. It establishes a complete mental framework that reorganizes your perception of abundance, dissolves limiting beliefs at their root, and establishes new neural pathways that automatically recognize opportunities invisible to most observers. The wealthy elite have always understood that prosperity is less about external circumstances and more about internal conditioning. What separates this wisdom from conventional financial advice is its holistic integration of seemingly disparate elements: faith and action, vision and practicality, patience and decisive movement. Modern society has fragmented these complementary forces, creating the illusion that one must choose between spiritual fulfillment and material abundance. Napoleon Hill adamantly rejected this false dichotomy, demonstrating through countless case studies that the most sustainable wealth emerges precisely when one's spiritual understanding aligns perfectly with material action. The psalm we're examining doesn't just suggest this integration, it provides the exact formula for achieving it, offering language that programs both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously for maximum manifestation power. Perhaps most remarkable is how this psalm addresses what Napoleon Hill identified as the greatest obstacle to wealth creation: the subconscious fear of prosperity that haunts most individuals. Through careful analysis of thousands of subjects, Napoleon Hill determined that many people consciously desire wealth, while subconsciously rejecting it through subtle self-sabotage mechanisms. The psalm's language works as a type of mental antidote to this contradiction, harmonizing the subconscious and conscious minds toward a singular purpose. It establishes what modern psychologists might call cognitive coherence, a state where all parts of the mind move in unified direction instead of working against each other. This coherence generates tremendous creative power, allowing individuals to manifest opportunities and solutions that previously seemed beyond reach. The transformation begins with understanding that this psalm isn't meant to be passively read or mechanically recited. It must be metabolized into your very being through what Napoleon Hill called emotional transmutation. The words themselves carry frequency patterns that, when internalized with genuine feeling, begin restructuring your relationship with abundance at the quantum level. Consider how Napoleon Hill documented cases of individuals who, upon properly applying these principles, experienced synchronicities and coincidences that defied statistical probability. Business opportunities appeared from unexpected sources. Resources materialized at precisely the needed moment. Beneficial connections formed without deliberate networking efforts. These weren't random occurrences, but the natural consequences of aligning one's mental frequency with universal prosperity laws, the exact alignment this psalm was designed to create. The first key to mastering this psalm's wealth-generating potential lies in understanding its perspective on abundance itself. While most approach wealth from a mindset of scarcity and competition, the psalm establishes a radically different foundation: the recognition of infinite supply. Napoleon Hill emphasized throughout his work that the most profound shift in wealth consciousness comes when one truly comprehends that prosperity isn't a limited resource to be fought over, but an ever-flowing stream available to all who understand its principles. The psalm articulates this precise understanding, using metaphorical language that bypasses the logical mind and speaks directly to the deeper consciousness where beliefs about abundance are formed and maintained. By internalizing this perspective shift, you cease operating from the desperate energy of lack and begin functioning from the magnetic position of aligned expectation. Napoleon Hill documented extensively how this perspective transformation manifests in practical behavior changes. Those who genuinely believe in abundance make decisions differently. They invest when others hoard. They expand when others contract. They collaborate when others compete. The psalm encodes this wisdom by establishing prosperity, not as something to be desperately pursued, but as your natural state when properly aligned with universal principles. This subtle but crucial distinction separates those who occasionally experience financial success from those who generate sustained, growing wealth across decades. The former chase money. The latter align with abundance. The most fascinating aspect of Napoleon Hill's research was how consistently this distinction appeared among those who had created generational prosperity rather than temporary financial gains. The second profound element within this psalm is its emphasis on what Napoleon Hill would later identify as definiteness of purpose, the absolute clarity of vision that precedes all meaningful achievement. Vague desires produce vague results, but crystallized intention generates crystallized manifestation. The psalm provides a framework for establishing this clarity, guiding the mind through a sequence of affirmations that progressively sharpen one's prosperity vision. Most people's financial goals remain fuzzy abstractions, emotional wishes rather than mental commands. The psalm corrects this fundamental error by providing language structures that transform nebulous hopes into precise instructions to both the conscious and subconscious mind, establishing what Napoleon Hill termed a burning desire that becomes the catalyst for extraordinary achievement. What makes this psalm's approach to definiteness of purpose particularly powerful is how it connects material desires to deeper values and service orientation. Napoleon Hill discovered that wealth created solely for selfish accumulation rarely sustained itself, while prosperity generated through value creation and meaningful contribution often multiplied exponentially. The psalm brilliantly encodes this wisdom, establishing a mental framework where abundance flows not as an end itself, but as the natural byproduct of aligned purpose and contribution. This perspective shift transforms how opportunities are perceived and pursued. Instead of desperately chasing financial gains, one begins recognizing and developing value creation channels that naturally attract resources. Napoleon Hill documented how consistently this pattern appeared among those who had built enduring wealth empires. The third transformative element within this psalm addresses what Napoleon Hill identified as the most overlooked aspect of wealth creation: the proper management of adversity and temporary defeat. His extensive research revealed that nearly every substantial fortune was preceded by periods of significant challenge, often multiple devastating setbacks that would have caused most to abandon their pursuits. The crucial difference wasn't the absence of obstacles, but the mental framework through which these challenges were interpreted and addressed. The psalm provides precisely this framework, establishing adversity not as evidence of failure, but as the necessary preparation for unprecedented growth. It fundamentally reprograms how the mind processes setbacks, transforming what most experience as discouragement into what the truly prosperous recognize as developmental stepping stones. The fourth dimension of this psalm's wealth-generating power lies in what Napoleon Hill termed the mastermind principle, the exponential creative force generated when minds unite in harmonious purpose. While most perceive wealth creation as an individual pursuit, Napoleon Hill's research conclusively demonstrated that behind every great fortune stood a network of aligned intelligences working in conscious or unconscious coordination. The psalm articulates this principle through metaphorical language that establishes prosperity not as a solitary achievement, but as the natural outgrowth of beneficial relationship. By internalizing this perspective, one begins attracting precisely the collaborative connections needed for exponential, rather than incremental growth. The mastermind principle manifests most powerfully when one recognizes that beneficial connections aren't limited to human relationships. Napoleon Hill extensively documented how intuition, inspiration, and synchronicity played decisive roles in the creation of substantial wealth. The truly prosperous learn to recognize and act upon subtle guidance that others dismiss as coincidence or imagination. The psalm establishes the mental and spiritual framework for receiving this guidance, creating what Napoleon Hill described as a sixth sense for opportunity and advantageous timing. This isn't mystical speculation but practical psychology. When the mind is properly tuned through the psalm's principles, it naturally becomes receptive to information and opportunities that the cluttered consciousness misses entirely. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this psalm's teaching is its approach to what Napoleon Hill identified as the primary inner obstacle to wealth: the subconscious fear of criticism, failure, and responsibility that paralyzes potential action. His research conclusively showed that this fear, more than any external circumstance, keeps most individuals trapped in financial mediocrity despite having sufficient knowledge and opportunity. The psalm directly addresses this psychological barrier through language patterns that systematically dismantle fear-based thinking, replacing it with a courage that doesn't deny potential negative outcomes but transcends their emotional control. By internalizing these patterns, one develops the capacity for bold, decisive action precisely when such movement creates maximum advantage. The sixth element of the psalm's wealth code addresses what Napoleon Hill termed organized planning, the systematic translation of desire into practical action steps. While most remain trapped in endless cycles of hope and disappointment, the psalm establishes a mental framework that naturally generates effective implementation strategies. Those who truly internalize its principles find themselves automatically breaking large visions into manageable components, prioritizing high-leverage activities, and maintaining disciplined consistency where others succumb to distraction or discouragement. Napoleon Hill documented this pattern repeatedly among those who had built sustainable prosperity. Their planning wasn't merely intellectual, but emerged from an integrated understanding that balanced vision with practical execution. The final transformative principle encoded within this psalm relates to what Napoleon Hill described as persistence, the absolute refusal to accept temporary defeat as permanent failure. His research definitively established that this quality, more than talent, education, connections, or even initial resources, determined who would ultimately create substantial wealth. The psalm provides the psychological infrastructure for developing this persistence, establishing mental patterns that interpret resistance not as evidence to retreat, but as invitation to advance with greater determination and creativity. By internalizing these patterns, one develops the emotional resilience that transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary achievement through sustained application despite apparent obstacles or lack of immediate results. The practical application of this psalm's principles begins with what Napoleon Hill termed autosuggestion, the deliberate imprinting of its wisdom upon both conscious and subconscious mind through repetition charged with genuine emotion. Simply reading or mechanically reciting the words produces minimal effect. Transformation occurs when the psalm's language is internalized through feeling-infused contemplation that penetrates beyond intellectual understanding. Napoleon Hill prescribed specific techniques for this internalization, including spoken affirmation upon waking and before sleeping, written transcription with focused attention, and visualization practices that mentally rehearse the experience of prosperity before its physical manifestation. These disciplines aren't superficial rituals, but psychological recalibration tools that systematically overwrite limiting beliefs with prosperity consciousness. The second application strategy involves what Napoleon Hill identified as specialized knowledge, the deliberate acquisition of specific information and skills that create tangible value. The psalm doesn't promote magical thinking that bypasses practical development. Rather, it establishes the mental foundation that naturally identifies which knowledge domains most deserve investment based on one's unique talents and market opportunities. Those who properly internalize its principles find themselves drawn toward precisely the learning experiences that will create maximum prosperity leverage. Napoleon Hill documented countless cases where seemingly inspired hunches led individuals to develop expertise in emerging fields shortly before explosive growth created unprecedented opportunities for early specialists. The third implementation dimension focuses on what Napoleon Hill termed imagination, the creative application of knowledge to produce innovative solutions that command premium value. His research established conclusively that substantial fortunes rarely emerged from doing what everyone else was doing, but from either doing it differently or doing something entirely new. The psalm activates this creative faculty by establishing mental patterns that naturally question assumptions, combine disparate concepts, and perceive possibilities invisible to conventional thinking. Those who properly internalize its principles find themselves generating breakthrough ideas not through forced effort, but through the natural emergence of creativity, once internal barriers have been removed and prosperity consciousness has been established. The fourth dimension of practical application involves what Napoleon Hill identified as accurate thinking, the disciplined separation of fact from fiction, evidence from opinion, and probability from wishful thinking. While the psalm establishes powerful prosperity consciousness, it simultaneously develops the mental discernment that prevents ungrounded speculation and impulsive action. Napoleon Hill's research demonstrated that the truly wealthy aren't reckless gamblers, but calculated risk-takers who develop extraordinary skill in evaluating opportunities. The psalm fosters this balanced approach by simultaneously encouraging bold vision while cultivating grounded assessment. Those who properly internalize its principles develop what might be called calibrated optimism, positive expectation tempered by practical evaluation. The final implementation strategy addresses the psychological phenomenon Napoleon Hill termed the power of the subconscious mind, the recognition that our deepest beliefs and expectations create subtle influences on perception, decision-making, and interaction patterns that ultimately determine material outcomes. The psalm works directly with this power, establishing prosperity consciousness at levels beyond mere intellectual affirmation. As this internal alignment develops, individuals begin noticing opportunities previously invisible, attracting resources previously unavailable, and generating solutions previously inconceivable. Napoleon Hill documented this pattern repeatedly. When fundamental belief structures shift, external circumstances respond, not through mystical attraction but through the practical changes in perception, behavior, and effectiveness that naturally flow from transformed consciousness. The journey we've undertaken today transcends mere financial strategy. It represents nothing less than a fundamental recalibration of your relationship with abundance itself. The wisdom encoded within this psalm, the same wisdom that Napoleon Hill extracted from the minds of history's greatest wealth creators, offers more than techniques or affirmations. It provides the complete inner architecture required for sustained prosperity. While conventional thinking separates spiritual understanding from material achievement, we've discovered their inseparable connection, recognizing that true wealth emerges precisely at the intersection of aligned purpose, disciplined action, and receptive consciousness. As you integrate these principles into your daily thought patterns, remember that you're not merely adopting new ideas, but fundamentally transforming your prosperity identity. What distinguishes those who create extraordinary wealth from those who merely wish for better circumstances is not external advantage, but but internal alignment. The psalm we've explored establishes precisely this alignment, harmonizing conscious intention with subconscious expectation, spiritual understanding with practical application. Napoleon Hill devoted decades to documenting how this harmony manifests as the tangible results that most attribute to luck, talent, or privileged circumstance. Yet the truth remains both simpler and more profound. Wealth follows consciousness with mathematical precision. Every principle we've examined today represents not theoretical speculation, but demonstrated patterns that have created prosperity across centuries, cultures, and economic conditions. The power now rests in your committed application of these universal laws. Consider for a moment the extraordinary turning point this knowledge represents in your life. Before today, you may have approached wealth creation from fragmented understanding, applying certain principles while unknowingly contradicting them through limiting beliefs or divided consciousness. The comprehensive framework we've explored leaves no room for such contradiction. It establishes complete coherence between your deepest values, conscious intentions, and practical actions. This integration generates what Napoleon Hill described as wealth momentum, the phenomenon where prosperity begins accelerating through its own self-reinforcing energy once proper alignment has been established. The question is no longer whether these principles work, but whether you'll apply them with the consistency and conviction they require. What becomes possible when you fully embody this understanding? Beyond mere financial independence lies the capacity for unprecedented contribution. Napoleon Hill observed that those who mastered these principles ultimately discovered that wealth creation became not their primary objective, but the natural byproduct of aligned purpose and value delivery. The greatest satisfaction came not from accumulation, but from the creative expression and meaningful impact that abundance made possible. As you implement this wisdom, maintain awareness of this deeper dimension, you're developing prosperity consciousness not merely for personal gain, but for the expanded contribution it enables. True wealth manifests not just as material resources, but as the freedom to express your highest gifts in service to others. The ancient wisdom contained within this psalm, illuminated through Napoleon Hill's lifelong research, offers nothing less than liberation from the scarcity consciousness that dominates most minds in our society. Imagine moving through life not from desperate striving but from centered abundance, perceiving opportunities where others see limitations, creating solutions where others are paralyzed by problems, and generating prosperity where others experience restriction. This transformation awaits your decision to not merely understand these principles intellectually, but to embody them completely through disciplined practice and unwavering commitment. If this message has resonated with something deep within you, consider it no coincidence, but recognition of truth you've always known but perhaps never fully articulated or applied. Now is the moment to translate that recognition into the consistent action that creates lasting transformation. If you've found value in these insights today, I invite you to become part of our community dedicated to mastering these timeless principles. Subscribe to this channel to continue your prosperity journey. Each new video builds upon these foundational understandings, providing practical applications for specific circumstances and challenges. Share this message with those who would benefit from this wisdom, as prosperity consciousness expands through generous transmission rather than fearful hoarding. Leave a comment below sharing which principle resonated most deeply with you, or what specific application you're committing to implement first. Your engagement creates not just community connection, but accountability for implementation, the crucial factor that transforms knowledge into results. Together, we're not just learning about prosperity, we're creating it through the aligned consciousness that this ancient psalm so perfectly articulates.